Eagles. Eagles.
Welcome in, everybody, to a Wednesday edition of Birds 365. Getting my days mixed up here this morning. Johnny Mack, how you doing on this Wednesday morning? A lot of news in the NFL world yesterday, Johnny Mack, including some on our Philadelphia Eagles. How you doing on this Wednesday, John?
Doing well. Hope everybody's good in Florida. We just had a listener who's listening to us. You should be battening down the hatches, though. I appreciate the loyalty, but everybody stay safe down there. And back to practice today. So locally, that's a big thing. Back after the bye week.
Yep, back after the bye. I do want to give a shout out. By the way, thank you to BetUS for sponsoring the show today, the full 2-hour show sponsored by BetUS. So big thanks to them. Jay, perfect. I got to give it. John, that's worthy of a shout out right here. Now, Jay, I'll say this to you. Please be safe and make sure everything is handled on your end the best you can. But this is dedication right here. Jay Perfect checks in on YouTube, everybody, and says, I'm in Tampa, Florida. Hurricane Milton is supposed to destroy us, but before it does, I got to listen to Birds 365. Imagine how dedicated and loyal of a fan I am. That might be worthy of a JAKIB sweatshirt giveaway, John. I might have to send Jay, if he makes it through, a little JAKIB sweatshirt. Jay, thanks for being here, brother. We appreciate that support, and hopefully everybody in Florida, John. I told you yesterday, our third most popular listening base is in Florida in terms of cities, so or states, actually. So we have Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and then Florida's number 3. So appreciate all of you guys for checking in. And Florida, anybody in Florida out there, stay safe. I know our buddy Bob Brown's down there as well. Daz, I know you're down there. So stay safe, all of our Florida people. Johnny Mack, Devin White cut yesterday. Your reaction?
Yeah, well, you should have known it was coming, but yeah, it didn't work out. It was a shot in the dark. It was a dart throw. I think, I put on Twitter, this is one of the most strangest situations where the perception never matched the reality because of, the things we talked about from day one when they made this signing, the pedigree, being a number 5 overall pick, the constant belief that everyone stays in that stasis and he's still that type of prospect or that type of player. He was never that type of player. He had the rare 3-game run to the Super Bowl, and that was basically it in Tampa Bay. He was a bad football player. The rest of the time he was in Tampa Bay. They took it as far as they took it. The Eagles paid him $3.5 million guaranteed. Even that, it was when they signed him, if you remember, it was portrayed as $7.5 million. So I think people were thrown off by that as well. It's just a bunch of incentives he was never going to reach to make it look better for him. And it was, if the dart throw works, great. If it doesn't, you move on. And probably took him too long to move on, to be honest. And it's, I'll tell you what, though, good guy, tremendous, handled it well, handled it in a classy fashion, at least in front of the cameras. Now, behind the scenes, the personal reasons, not going back to Tampa, obviously, he just didn't want to be involved at that point. Even if you go back to week 1, they didn't take him to Brazil because it was evident he was not going to be a part of this thing. They came up with a tweaked ankle, which magically went away. Then it was a healthy scratch. And then the personal reasons. Never played a snap for the Philadelphia Eagles. And
never even dressed.
Never dressed. Once he lost the job, basically the Eagles didn't want to hand the middle linebacker job to Nakobe Dean again. That's basically what happened here. They were hoping he would win it. He did win it. And once Vic Fangio became comfortable with Zach Vaughn at the other position, which was a bit of a surprise, to be honest, that was the bigger surprise to me. Then there was just no role because then you have to play special teams. And Ben Van Sumer is probably their best special teams player. Oren Burks has been a long time good special teams player in this league and a good backup linebacker. And obviously you have the rookie Jeremiah Trotter Jr. And he just didn't have a role. And finally, we can turn the page.
John, there's a couple questions I have from it. One is now what happens with the linebacking core? Who steps up? Will somebody step up? Nakobe Dean hasn't been great, so we'll get to that. But they never even gave the guy a chance. I mean, if what if this guy can play? Are we sure he can't play? They never even gave him a shot. John,
He had the vast majority of first team reps for at least through the first 2 weeks of training camp.
Yeah.
And then it started. They gave him plenty of opportunity behind the scenes.
Yeah, but that's different than gameplay. I mean,
well, that's where you win and lose jobs, though.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, when you have marginal linebackers at best, you would think they would at least give the guy the first rounder a chance to get on the field at least.
He's not good. I don't know. I don't like to disrespect players. I don't like to because they're all given effort. But this pedigree thing is a problem with fans around the NFL, and I'm not picking on Eagles fans. He isn't good because he was the number 5 pick. He literally never had one mediocre season in Tampa Bay if you look at the film. And then they'll come back, well, he was an all-pro. Well, my buddy Rob Monty, and I've said this to him, you got to take some of those votes away from those writers who are looking at box scores and seeing a black and white figure of 9 sacks and saying this guy's an all-pro because he's got 9 sacks. He was never consistent. He was always every single year near the bottom of the linebackers in this league who played when it came to the film work. And you can look at PFF, you can look at True Media, you can look at Next Gen Stats. He was not a good football player. It happens all the time. It's a disaster when you miss that badly on a number 5 overall pick. But that's what happened. And if he were a 7th round pick, he would have been out of this league
quick
3 years ago.
Yeah.
So the reason they didn't give him a chance, they have more confidence in Ben Van Sumeren and Warren Burks and Jeremiah Trotter Jr. as a rookie. That's where the organization is. That's why he's not getting a chance. If they thought he was better, he'd be here. If they thought he was better, he'd be dressed. They were more comfortable. Let's face it, with Nakobe's injury history coming off last year, and Zach Baughn's status as an emerging player who hasn't really played the position of weak side linebacker, they could have used a veteran presence, and they didn't want it because they had more confidence that Ben Van Sumeren or Jeremiah Trotter could step in. Now, I think those players, especially Ben, is and maybe Trot down the road, but he's more unproven. But I think people don't understand how much he's progressed behind the scenes. Again, that's where you win and lose jobs. So, and I've been saying it since practically day one that the linebackers are all interchangeable. Like I would have as much confidence Nakobe and Devin is.
You have been saying that, that's for sure.
So again, we're not talking about Fred Warner here when we're talking about Nakobe Dean, but it was clear he was a better player than Devin White. And by the way, that's what the Eagles wanted to happen. So now he hasn't performed, but they weren't going to bench him for Devin White. This meant they weren't going to play Devin White. So I mean, I don't know what to tell people.
I'm telling you now, John, and it's going to be fair. The Howie Roseman critique of him being able to evaluate defensive players is getting worse and worse. You're talking about 3.5 on Devin White. So you paid 3.5 to give Nakobe Dean competition. Okay, great. You paid $8 million to CJ Gardner-Johnson, who effectively stinks other than a good tackle every once in a while. You paid $51 million to Bryce Huff. He stinks and can't get around a tight end. I mean, shit, it looks like we should have just spent the extra money for Xavier McKinney and got a game-changing player, but the evaluation has been bad, and how he's going to get criticized for it, and it's going to be completely fair because the defense
Well,
looks
this is
first-round
not
draft picks aren't performing. And now you're cutting guys that, whether the expectation was fair or not from the fan base is another point. The evaluation of players on defense is putrid. It's putrid. And you're potentially talking about the Philadelphia Eagles, John, wasting the greatest offensive roster they've had in the history of the organization.
Yeah, well,
because
they better fix that too.
Well, the defense is putrid. I mean, that's the brutal truth right now. So when Devin White goes, I think it highlights a bunch of other things, especially for fans that went wrong. And you're like, boy, this was a bad offseason for Howie. It was a bad offseason. Right now, we're only 4 games in, but right now it's a bad offseason.
Well, they want to ignore Quinyon Mitchell, and people who don't like Howie are going to ignore, Zach Baun. You want to focus on Devin White. You tried it with 2 players and you got 1, maybe. And by the way, I'm not going to sit here and say Zach Baun is going to be good for 17 games because there's still a lot of uncertainty there,
John, and you know that. That would be like saying we failed on Saquon Barkley, but because Will Shipley was a good draft pick,
why doesn't it work? It worked with Jordan Mailata and Andre Dillard. As long as you get the player, I don't think it's a bad competition. As long as you get the player, who gives a crap where you get? That's my point. This whole thing is about pedigree. I'm not talking about. You can talk about Bryce Huff
because the defense is bad, so it's not about pedigree.
You're expanding it because a bunch of people thought Devin White was some kind of significant addition, and this was a dart throw. So if you want to blame him, this was Kaiser White who worked out. But guess what? If Kaiser White didn't work out, you just cut him and move on. Who cares? That's what this was. Yeah, you hope, you sit there and cross your fingers, but it's a lottery ticket, and it didn't work, so you cut ties. And by the way, the other guys developed better behind the scenes. This particular move is not a disappointment. Now, if you want to talk about the other moves, we can talk about the other moves. Bryce Huff, disappointment.
Well, it's the first domino to fall. I get what you're saying. Cutting Devin White, not that big of a deal. But when you look at that with the litany of other things they did on defense, it does start to look worse. But I get what you're saying. I mean, I'm making it a bigger scope than what the Devin White cut is.
Well, ironically, I think Howie probably did a better job, a worse job than the majority of the people. The disconnect is the over expectations on Devin White by far, number 1, and even a CJ Gardner-Johnson, number 2, who, people made into Ronnie Lott. There were a lot of holes back in 2022 when he had a career year. And I said pretty early, he's probably not going to have a career year again. So the expectations play into it a lot, but they'll get better on defense. It's a growing thing, and they'll get better because A, they have to get better, and B, Vic's a smart guy. But this particular player, look, I can't hold your hand. The film's all out there. Get $99, buy NFL Game Pass, watch the guy on film in Tampa Bay, and it will be a stark difference from what you thought because you read 9 sacks or you read some knucklehead say, this is an all-pro player. All-pro players who were number 5 picks in the draft don't get $3.5 million when they hit free agency. A, they don't hit free agency because they're so good they want to keep them. And B, if by some reason somebody's so incompetent from a financial perspective, they have to get somebody like that hit free agency, they get $100 million contract, not $3.5 million. to come resuscitate their career. I do not know why the perception, why I gave as many answers as I can on why the perception what it was. The contract told you everything. This was a dart throw. And guess what? It didn't hit the bullseye.
No.
Big deal.
No, it did not. No, you're right, though. I mean, I get what you're saying about Devin. I think my point is now I'm starting to look at all of the moves, and it's not just one dart that's failing right now; it's multiple. So we'll see how it all plays out. John, I will ask you about the rest of the linebacker core and what this means for them. Does this potentially mean more time? Is it no change at all because he wasn't even dressing? Does it mean
no change at all? He was not involved. He was not relevant. He was not part of the same guys were the backups for the first 4 games. Ben Van Sumeren, Oren Burks, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. Those were the backups. If Nakobe Dean got hurt, those are the guys they would be deciding between on who's going to play. He wasn't going to jump those guys. He wasn't even dressing. He wasn't even involved. He wasn't even part of the plan. And this is, by the way, if you want to criticize Howie on that, feel free. This guy should have been cut at the cut down to 53, but he's got a difficult time admitting mistakes. Anaya Smith should have been cut at the 53. James Bradbury should have been cut. You take it as far as you take it. If you can't get something to trade for it, you move on.
Yeah, that's what they were trying to do the last couple of weeks, right? Trade him.
Yeah, and who's going to trade? He signed for.
No, I knew nobody was going to, but I'm just saying. I had a comment like, "Oh, Howie's such a great guy, letting him go and pick his destination." I'm like, "Well, I don't know about that. I'm sure Howie."
Oh, and by the way, they got some money back. That's why they let him go.
Wait, did they get some of the 3.5 back?
Yeah,
or was it just the
they
extra?
got some of the 3.5 back. I don't know the exact number, but they got some of the 3.5 back, and that's why they let him go.
That's
Otherwise,
a little confusing to me. I thought when you get 3.5 guaranteed, that means you're getting paid $3.5 million.
Well, it does, but Devin was willing to give some of it back in exchange to get released before the trade deadline. The trade deadline is key because after the trade deadline, everybody's got to go through waivers. Typically, vested veterans don't have to go through waivers. So if you cut somebody, they can sign with anybody immediately. But after the trade deadline, anybody who's released has to go through waivers. So in theory, he can't pick his destination. Actually, in practicality, nobody's claiming Devin White on waivers. So he would have gotten to pick his destination anyway. However, Howie would probably kick this can down the road to November 5th because he's trying desperately to get something because, as I just said, he's very hesitant to admit mistakes. And because of the high profile nature of this mistake, and I have no idea why it was high profile.
Well, the organization doesn't do a good job, John, of tempering some of these extra. I know you do, and I was ready for it, but like they talk some of these dudes up, John. I'm sorry, with the social media team and the accountability group chat and all this BS. Fans think they're getting this great player.
Well, that's hey.
I'm not blaming that on you. But I'm just saying sometimes the organization creates some of these expectations or furthers them, and it's makes
this is the run defense grades. For a guy you wanted to be the Eagles' middle linebacker. And I know we got to get to Mike Gill. 81 of 100, 82 of 96, 91 of 94, 83 of 90, 87 of 89. He was never a good player.
Got it, John. Let's get the 2 quick super chats. By the way, we didn't even get to the Robert Saleh news. I wanted to ask you about that, but we got caught up in Devin White, the release of Devin White this morning. And we'll talk to Mike Gill next, and then we'll probably get into Robert Saleh maybe a little bit after that. But let's go 2 super chats here, John, both from James Carver. James, big shout out to you, brother. Appreciate your support. He says, J-Mac, you admitted last year Ringo was a ton better in the games and not the practices. They should have at least tested that for Devin in any one game. And I'll read his second one because it's in a similar realm. He says, J-Mac, a tester would have been worth trying within a game. I don't care about his release. I care about not trying in a game. I think that's where a lot of people are. John, your thoughts and your response to Big James.
Well, right away, Kaylee Ringo never played before. This guy's played 76 NFL games.
Yeah, and you just gave us the numbers. They weren't good.
76 NFL games. That sample size is large enough. Coupled with what they saw in training camp. And again, what they saw in training camp is more of what, you're talking about a bunch of young players, Ben Van Sumer and Jeremiah Trotter, not so much Oren Burks, but those two particularly. They were trying to figure out, can we count on these guys? And once they said yes, then it was over. So it had more to do with those guys. If they didn't trust those guys,
right, they'd probably keep them here.
Yeah. So it had more to do with those guys. But yeah, the Ringo comparison, no. Ringo has barely played. This guy's played a ton. And most of it is bad film.
One more super chat. Brian Garner, appreciate it, brother. He says, I've watched White's tape from last year, and it's horrible. It's okay to make mistakes, but cut bait and move on. John, that's a Johnny Mac super chat right there from Brian Garner.
Well, anybody can do it. I it's all there. Any fan now in the old days, you couldn't do it. Now you can do it. Go watch if you think he's good. You wouldn't be happy if he had to play. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Well, James does bring up a good point. People will wonder that the style of defense is different. You talk about Bryce Huff not succeeding in this style. Maybe it would have been better for Devin. But anyway, we got to get to our commercial break. Let's get to Mike Gill coming up next here on Birds 365. Before I do that, everybody, let me tell you about our great friends at BetUS. Look at that on the screen. Promo code YouTube150 gets you a 150% sign-up bonus on your very first deposit. Then you get 125% on your second and third deposits, and that's all up to $2,000. So deposit less and bet with more on BetUS.com, and that's BetUS.com.pa. Go to BetUS.com.pa. They got the fastest payouts in the industry, 24/7 customer support, and they'll even give you your own custom account manager, as well as up to 10% back on your losses twice a year. So if you pick Saquon to go over and he for whatever reason doesn't go over, BetUS will give you some relief on that. So go to betus.com.pa. That's betus.com.pa. Birds 365 back in 3 minutes, everybody.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.